All right, I think we've got a quorum, critical mass here. So let's go ahead and get started. So my name's Brian Peace, leading the marketing team here at Panther, and I'll be your host today. Today we're talking about the Panther product platform. We're going to give a demo, but also kind of tee up a threat scenario and talk about just the general solution landscape. Before we dive in, a couple of quick housekeeping items. So first and foremost, we want this to be engaging. So please use the Zoom Q&A feature. We'll be looking at those throughout the session and then saving 5 to 10 minutes at the end to address those questions live. If a question is really specific to your scenario, we'll either direct message the response to it or we'll follow up via email after today's session. And then lastly, we're recording this session, so keep an eye out for the recording in your email later this week. You can rewatch the content, share it with your colleague, and keep kind of learning about the best practices of SIEM and Panther. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to today's printers. So we've got Dirk and Nick. So Dirk and Nick, you want to do a quick intro and then take it away from there?
Sure, I can go first. Thanks so much for teeing this up, Brian. Hey folks, my name is Dirk Kaysen. I'm an enterprise account executive over here at Panther. I work closely with companies across different verticals that are looking to solve security challenges with Panther. Nick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm a solution engineer here at Panther. I work alongside of Dirk and other account executives, and really excited to show you guys a little bit about Panther's product, and I'm excited to talk through the threat scenario that'll help guide me through that. But kick us off, Dirk.
Sounds great. So in terms of today's agenda, folks, we're going to cover a couple of different things. First and foremost, we'll chat a little bit about the Panther solution. That'll include talking a little bit about today's landscape as well as Panther's tool specifically. I think after that, Nick will kind of introduce a sample threat scenario as well as kind of get into the Panther product demo. And then we'll wrap things up with a live Q&A towards the end of our call today. So without further ado, let's get into sort of like Panther solution, and we can chat a bit about the current landscape first. So first and foremost, the average SOC team is drowning in noise today. There's far too many alerts that are either false positive or just low priority to begin with. And really what this leads to are slow incident response times and just alert fatigue across the organization, which is really an unfavorable outcome in total. And if we think about some of the main culprits of this, right, like where should we assign blame? It's really, in our mind, it kind of comes down to three bad actors. And the first is bad data. Bad data in a SIM really leads to challenges like false positives, incomplete, inaccurate data, and just difficulties in general in the detection landscape due to poor data normalization. And dealing with this requires immense resources in terms of data cleansing on the normalization side, and ultimately this diverts from other security initiatives that your organization might be pursuing at the time. Additionally, monitoring this bad data becomes incredibly complex and overall affects the overall trust within the SIM and the alerts that it produces amongst analysts and other stakeholders. Second, if we move on to the next piece here, which is inflexible detections, historically, legacy SIMs have not really been easy to create flexible detections that meet attackers where they are. And so, rules typically are not easily customized to the environment, to the scenario, to different use cases, and a lack of support, for engineering processes and automations, here really contributes to a lot of frustration and manual tuning over time that's really unsustainable. All of this really typically stems from the fact that legacy solutions tend to be black boxes and hard to work with. The third piece here is excessive ops overhead and just general vendor lock-in. So as I mentioned earlier, the legacy architecture of most SIMs is one that was built for on-prem workloads, but then adopted to the cloud. And this leads to a couple of poor outcomes. The first of which is that the solution is typically challenging to scale, and provides or presents excessive operational overheads that obviously take away from higher value security activities and typically cost a bundle. As a result, because of this non-scalable nature, storing historical data for effective investigations is really cost prohibitive, and ultimately leads to additional frustration and inherent lack of speed and flexibility. Oh, thanks, Brian. So if we think about Panther, right, like who we are, why we're different, how we help, the first thing that we look to address based on practitioners' experience with legacy architectures is the clean data problem. And so in the Panther with the Panther platform, we parse and normalize unstructured logs from a bunch of different sources to ensure consistency and accuracy in data representation within the SIM and across the security data lake. And by converting these unstructured logs into a structured format, we really enable easier analysis, intelligent correlation, and thorough detection of security events. And the idea here is that this is all in service of reducing the likelihood of false positives and false negatives. Additionally, improved data quality and consistency really enables practitioners to detect and respond to security threats effectively and immediately, minimizing obviously response time and enhancing the overall security posture and trust in the security organization. The next piece here that's kind of useful to get into that I think is probably not new to folks that are familiar with Panther is detection as code. This is our core foundational pillar and one of the biggest reasons why we are so unique within the marketplace. Detection as code revolutionizes SecOps organizations with flexible, scalable detections that can be attached to CI/CD engineering best practices and principles. With detection as code, we provide customers really the ability to perform intelligent code-driven correlation of activity across different systems, environments, and with detection as code, we firmly believe that better code, better detections leads to better outcomes. Now, the third piece here is sort of the cloud native component of Panther. Panther is built on a serverless backend of AWS Lambdas. And so we can scale really infinitely depending on what the workload looks like. And this delivers, high performance without operational overhead and maintenance overhead. And the idea here is that the team can then focus on higher value security activities. Additionally, Panther is built in the cloud, and we leverage Snowflake as a backend data store to create security data lakes for our customers. And what this leads to is, a cost-effective storage mechanism for a streamlined investigation at a fraction of the cost of traditional SIMs. Cool, thanks, Brian. So what does this look like under the hood, right? So on the left here, we have, robust security data processing pipelines, of which Panther's built, over 100 different pre-built log integrations. Many of these are for, tools that your mom or your grandmother might recognize as within the security space, right? And we also offer deep, intuitive support for custom schemas and custom log sources as well. Once that data is ingested, Panther normalizes that data and parses it into schemas. And once it enters into Panther in that normalized fashion, the detection writing process begins. And this is where our customers lean into detection as code and can map those detections to a CI/CD process for automation. Once the detections are created, then an alert is generated and fired when there's a rule match. And this can be pushed into several different ticketing or alert destination options. Additionally, a copy of this data, a copy of the JSON payload, is also sent to Snowflake to create that security data lake that I referred to earlier for really fast, streamlined investigations and threat hunting. Out of the box, Panther provides its customers with a year's worth of data storage and retention as well. And with that being said, I'd love to kick it over to Nick to kind of chat through a threat scenario. Nick, take it away.
Thanks, Dirk. Yeah, and if we think back to one of Dirk's slides around the kind of centerpiece of Panther, detections as code is that centerpiece. And I've found it's very helpful to think through that detection as code piece by thinking through a threat scenario. And the threat scenario that we have outlined for you today is called scattered spider octa attacks. And it's called scattered spider octa attacks because the threat actor group was called, or is called, scattered spider. This happened not too long ago, back in late 2023. And what they were able to do is obtain access into the octa tenants of high-profile clients like MGM and Caesars and others, and establishing persistence into those accounts so that they could access other things. And if we go to the next slide on and look at the kill chain analysis, we can start to understand how they were able to achieve this, and then further understand how Panther could have helped along the way. So the first step of this analysis was how they got credentials. And it seems kind of silly when you think about it in retrospect, but they simply just posed as tech support and got a session token from an Okta app administrator. They then used that Okta session token in combination with a VPN to anonymize their traffic. And then that's where they established their own identity provider within that Okta tenant, and then further established persistence by creating a unique group and attaching admin roles assigned to it. And what you'll notice at the bottom of this slide is several links. And what that represents is a rule that Panther supports out of the box that would have alerted an administrator who has implemented Panther about this activity going on. And if I can steal the screen share from you, Brian, I'd like to show you guys how this is all set up. Let me get my screen shared. And so here we are. If we jump into a Panther console, of course, we're going to always start out with the overview screen where we're showing all of our alerts. But the first step to monitoring an environment is, of course, onboarding the data. So in this environment, we actually already have an Okta tenant set up. It's really as simple as generating an API key with Okta, providing that to Panther, and then you're off and running. But there's a number of other ways that you can get data into Panther that we won't cover on today's call. And I would encourage anybody to reach out to us if they wanted to see a demo or understand how that works in more depth. But because, again, that this environment already has Okta data flowing, then we can really just focus our energy on detection building. And so, again, thinking back to that threat scenario, there's already detections that Panther makes available out of the box for this model. And I'd like to talk through one or two of them to help everybody understand how they work. So if I just set up a quick filter here to reduce what I'm seeing in this admin panel, then we can click into some of them. Here's one, Okta group admin role assigned. If we click into this, then we can start to break it down and understand how it works. Of course, it has a title. It has a connection to a log source. In this case, it's Okta. And then right here, we get into the bread and butter around creating our detection logic against that log event to determine if the activity that we're looking for is helpful or is happening so that we can alert on it. And in this case, the logic is very, very simple. We're just simply inspecting the event, and we're looking for a key called event type, and we're looking for a value of group.privilege.grant. This is probably as simple of a detection as it can get, but because we're using Python, we can get very flexible and customizable with it. So if I wanted to whitelist certain groups or blacklist other groups, I could add some logic in here for that. If I wanted to pay attention to specific usernames that are performing these actions, I can really break this out into a number of different ways, but at its core, what we're looking for are group changes, and that's what this is doing here. You can see also there's some other functions called title and alert context. Again, because we're using Python, you have the flexibility to shape how that alert ends up looking when your analyst team or the person triaging this event, so they have all the context that they need at that moment in time. They don't have to go digging for more information. It's not as simple as an Okta group admin role has been assigned. It's this admin privileges has been assigned to this specific group. So now when I jump into the admin console within Okta, I can just go either inspect that or delete it or remove it or whatever I need to do. And because we're posting alerts, we can shape that alert context as well, and we can connect to many different alert outputs like Slack, or maybe we want to post to something like Torque or Tines or BlinkOps and start to automate some of these removals so that the moment an unauthorized user or person at your company is creating actions, it's just automatically deleted on the back end. So you can kind of interweave Panther into your technology stack so that you're taking full advantage of everything. And here's where I'm creating that alert. It's just simply toggled on. It's marked at a default severity level of high. And then of course we have some additional metadata around what's going on here, including a reference to where I can look up more information about what's going on. This could be internal or external. All of these fields are customizable and shapeable by your security team. You can even map these detections to frameworks, whether you're trying to map towards MITRE ATT&CK or maybe a different framework. You can shape these however you'd like. And then there's the ability to test these individual detections as well, both in a static sense where I supply a sample event and test that event against my rule logic above, but then also a dynamic sense where I can actually replay data through the system and then simulate how many alerts would have occurred. So in this demo environment, you're seeing 12 alerts because we're mocking data all the time and just kind of proving a point. In this case, we actually have a slight bug in that the group is pointing to an unknown field. And if I wanted to resolve that really quickly, I could understand why that's happening, which is to say the alternate ID field that we're looking at in the Okta log, in my demo environment for Okta, I never populated that value. So I would be better suited in my case to point at a different field that actually has the title. So we can see down here in my test case, the log event is actually properly filled out, but in my demo environment in reality, I would have been better off picking the display name instead of alternate ID. So again, it's just indicating how helpful testing is before you actually, deploy and rely on these detections that are firing off. And so this is one individual detection. If I click create new, there's many types of detections within Panther. So most of the time we're talking about rules within Panther. Those are the detection types that are analyzing log traffic as it's coming in. And it gives us a real opportunity to be proactive about axing malicious activity that's occurring in my environment. On the flip side of that, I could also create a scheduled rule where, since I'm collecting all the data into a centralized place, our place being Snowflake, then I can create queries that I can then in turn analyze with detection logic and create a detection rule against the data that way. But another rule that I wanted to focus on today, or a detection type that I wanted to focus on today, is called correlation rule. And if we think back to our threat scenario, then we know a model that threat actors use is either stealing a session token or establishing a connection with a VPN after that, so on and so forth. And we can start to model those things. And here's a brief example of that, where I am defining a sequence of events, and these sequence of events are defined by individual detections. One of them being that group admin role assigned detection that we were just talking through. Another one being an identity provider created. And then another one being, hey, somebody's accessing via a VPN. And then while each of these individual actions can occur normally in any given environment, the combination of these actions is a little bit more malicious. And in this case, we marked it as critical. And it's a very powerful thing to be able to model these threat scenarios and then define specific scenarios that can occur either in sequence like it's defined here, but you could also do a group of actions as well, to say like, hey, anytime this series of actions occurs or this group of actions occurs, then I would definitely like to know about that, and I'm going to alert as fast as possible. In this case, it's running once a day, and it's looking back at a day's worth of data to see what's going on. But you can control these numbers however you see fit. And further, these also contain unit tests as well. So, testing, making sure that your detections are working the way you would expect is fundamental to Panther. And the last thing I'll mention on detections is that while I'm demonstrating out of the Panther console today, you can, by all means, create detections within the Panther console, but you can also integrate your own IDE into this workflow. Like I use Visual Studio all the time and create my detections there, interact through my IDE with something like GitHub, manage all my detection content there, and then use something like GitHub Actions to ultimately upload from a central place to my console. And then that gives me a lot of version control, approvals, things like that, just making sure that nobody's breaking the instance. And the other thing that I wanted to show before I pass it back to Brian is, what this alert actually ends up looking like. So if I tab over to alerts here, I can click into any one of these. I'm going to click into this one here. And while this could show up in something like Slack or maybe a Jira ticket, maybe it's Teams, maybe it's a custom pipeline that you guys put together, those are all possibilities. Ultimately, if you wanted to learn more about what's going on, then you're going to be brought back into the Panther console like you see here, and then I can start to pivot around if I need to. We can summarize what's going on in the alert with an LLM here to help the analyst understand what occurred below within the log events. If I wanted to use that, it's actually pretty powerful. I think of it as like a SOC 1 or tier 1 SOC analyst. It's just saying, hey, like here's what we think is going on. And if I wanted to pivot around into any of these other areas, then because we have all the data, we can definitely do that. And how would you do that? There's a couple of different ways. For me, what I like to start doing is I like to just click this search events button. And what that will do is bring me to the search interface. It will bring me uniquely to this alert ID, and I can see clear as day in front of me like what's going on, with one added tweak. If I scroll down within a given log event, then I can summarize on certain fields or add certain fields to a column. And I can do that by hovering over this plus icon as a button. And here, what I'm trying to do is just simply add what rule has occurred. So now I can see a quick timeline of events. So in this case, it's bottom to top for like what happened first and what happened last. And so I can clearly see somebody logged in with a VPN, then they made modifications to an identity provider, and then they assigned the admin action to a specific group. And if I clicked into any of these, like maybe I wanted to understand more information, then I can see what Panther knows about it. I can see the usernames, I can see the IP address that this action occurred from. Further, I can see enrichment information that was layered into all of these events as well. So Panther's got an integration with IP info here, for example. So I can see that, okay, this action came from Farmington Hills. That's where I'm at. I'm in Michigan. So I know that this is just a demo example, but if this was an actual environment, then these pieces of information are very, very helpful for me to quickly see like, hey, okay, I came in from this IP address, but where is that IP address based out of? Boom, enrichment here. And further, if it didn't show up down below, then I can hover over these things and click this enrichment data button as well. And I can see more information about what I know for the username. So in this case, my profile that I set up in my demo Octo account contains this amount of information, but you can you can shape that however you see fit as well. And then further, you can pivot on this type of information too. So if I wanted to see what other activity has come from this IP address, then I can just filter this by value. Let me remove this specific alert ID. Let me go to all of our logs, and let's say let me back up like the last month. Let's see what's going on. And click search. And then I would go through the same motions that I was kind of just highlighting before, where let me click into the logs. Actually, first and foremost, what I might want to do is click on visualizations, understand what log types this IP address is hitting. In this demo environment, now I have a clear understanding that I'm hitting the Panther console and Okta specifically. And so if I wanted to know more about, let's say, what's going on in Panther, then what I can use are the Panther audit log events to understand what actions I'm taking. So I can hit this plus icon on that. I can hit the plus icon on the action result. I want to understand if these actions are succeeding or failing. And then further, maybe I just want to know like what version these actions are occurring in over the past month too of the Panther console. And now, again, when I tab back over to visualizations, I can see a quick summary of what's going on. And 55% of them are succeeding, where that field is valid, and 55 events out of how many events are we looking at here? 14,000 are failing. But maybe I wanted to understand what events are failing. I can click that 55 events link there, tab back up, search again, and now I'm just narrowing my search results down. So, while Panther's trying to be as proactive as we possibly can, we understand it's not always possible to be as proactive as possible, but because we're centralizing all the data, we can search and dig and be curious about what's going on in our environments very easy with the search interface. And then further, if I wanted to use SQL or Snowflake's flavor of SQL, I can use that as well. But pivoting around with the search interface is very straightforward. And yeah, would love to show anybody that's on the call more information about each of the different pillars within Panther. Like I said, or like we said earlier, this demo was mostly focused on the detection engine. But if we wanted to learn more about log ingestion, building pipelines, searching around, crafting alerts, routing alerts to destinations, and building automation on top of that, would love to have those conversations. But for now, I'll pass it back to Brian.
All right, thank you, Nick. I'm going to take over the share here. All right, so we got a couple of really good questions from the audience. I think that something that really stood out throughout your presentation and walkthrough, Nick, was correlation rules. So question here is basically acknowledging that the correlations are a sequence of different rules. So the question is, does it mean that in addition to the alert for the correlation, they would get distinct alerts for the sequence of rules? So I think it's a good tee up for the concept of signals. So maybe can you that a little bit?
Yeah, and I meant to cover that in the demo. I totally skipped over it. You might remember the alerts, the create alerts was a toggle. It was like either on or off. And what that means is you can either create an alert, meaning route it to something like Teams or Slack or whatever destination you pick, or you can just simply create a signal that could then in turn be used later on during an investigation or in a sequence or group of actions built by the correlations engine. So yeah, it's totally up to you. There's reasons that you might want to have both the alert for the whole correlation set, but then also an individual alert for like maybe one of the detections that make up the correlation rule. It's purely flexible.
Great. All right, another one that's kind of, I think, more generally about the question is, can you codify correlation rules? So I think maybe that's more about like how do correlation rules work in a CI/CD environment and kind of engineering pipelines. So can you speak to that?
Yep, they absolutely can be. One of the things that we should share in the chat, if we can, is a link to our Panther analysis GitHub repository, which is where Panther posts all of our detections out of the box. And what you'll see in there is an example set of correlation rules, and you'll see how they're written in in a YAML file, which would ultimately be uploaded to the Panther console. So yes, you're not, like I was saying earlier, while I was in the Panther console, you're not limited to just using the Panther console. You can use the tools or the development tools that you're more friendly with.
Awesome. And yeah, it looks like, thank you, Remy, for sharing the link to our Panther analysis tool GitHub. Cool. Let's see what else we got. So there's a question about how quickly can Panther deploy in a, like, I know there isn't really such thing as a standard environment, but maybe talk about the deployment timelines.
Yeah, so when I'm thinking about deployments, I'm thinking of like spinning Panther up from scratch inside of AWS. That takes about an hour. But I'm also thinking about like how fast can I get Panther up and running in my security team? And I've seen it done over a weekend. I've seen it take a couple months. It just honestly depends on the level of motivation and where you're starting from. You know, if you're trying to replace an existing tool, there's naturally going to be a slower process because we got to migrate things from the existing tool to the new tool being Panther. If it's a net new tool, then we can kind of just get up and running within a couple days. It's really as fast as you'd like.
Great. So question from Sergey. It's basically asking like when like integrations or ingestion as code, like how are we expanding beyond S3 to let's see, Terraform. Nick, I think you have access to this question directly on detection as code and like integration, so maybe you can speak to some of the capabilities there.
Oh yeah, I just pulled it up. So when can we expect integrations as code? That's a good question. We've got some support with that with Terraform and S3 buckets specifically, but it's not as robust as we would all like. It's definitely been something that we've talked about at Panther for quite some time, and I think it is a natural evolution of Panther in that if we want to manage everything in code, then configuring and establishing not only just the ingestion content that you connect to Panther, but also configuring Panther itself as a console it is definitely on our minds. It's just a matter of balancing those feature developments against other feature developments. So right now we're focused on improving the detections engine. And prior to that, we were focused on improving the search interface. So I suspect once we're happy with where the detection engine lands, ingestion will be a natural next step.
Great. Got another question on ingestion. So basically, how do you ingest logs from a custom application? I can talk to this at a high level. We have obviously the pre-built APIs wouldn't cover this for log ingestion, but you can either configure a custom HTTP webhook to pull the logs from your custom application, or you can pop it into an S3 bucket and then we'll take it from there. If for whatever reason your log formats from that custom application are very exotic or non-standard, we partner with an organization called Observo that their kind of sweet spot is untangling these custom logs and bringing them in. So there's a couple different options there. Nick, I don't know if you had anything else to add.
The only thing that I would add is that the detection content that Panther makes available out of the box is in that link that Remy shared. I would map what you have in your environment against that, and then we are here to help, or we can work with partners to fill the gaps. The idea behind Panther is that there would be customization and unique detection content created by your team, but it's not our assumption that you should start from zero, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I can answer Sergey's question as well. Speaking of unit tests, what other values can you assert on, like a severity or a title? You can do both. I didn't show this in the demo that explicitly, but when you test or when you add a unit test and it has a sample event, that unit test is tested against the detection that you write above, so that if you include a severity function or you change the title, when you click the run test button, it will produce the result that you would see downstream. So if it's not reflecting what you would expect, then you need to make changes in your code.
All right, good stuff. There's a question, how do we secure customer data? So that probably could be its own webinar. I think, Nick, if you have some high-level points that we can cover there, and then Reno, I think that you're asking about a custom, like kind of walkthrough and personalized demo, so we can dig more into this if we have that conversation. But Nick or Dirk, I don't know if you have any high-level points on just data security for our customers.
My technical angle on it is it's encrypted in transit, of course, HTTPS 443. It's stored securely in a data lake. That data lake can be supplied by Panther or for other, compliance reasons. Or just you might have Snowflake in your environment and you want to use it, you can bring your own Snowflake as well. So if you want, you can control the data pipeline however you'd like. It's a pretty broad question though, and I agree with Brian. Like it could be a whole its whole own webinar, and probably be better if there was dialogue back and forth.
Yeah,
I can add something there too.
In any Panther deployment, there's two different options for deployment. Option number one is a standard, as a more or less like sort of standard SaaS deployment in which we host the software, and is akin to what you would expect from a SaaS vendor. Deployment option number two represents a bit more security as well. So Panther in this scenario deploys within our customer's AWS environment, and the data never leaves that environment. So not only is the hosting done on the customer side, right, but this also leads to additional security, privacy, compliance, that sort of thing. So a couple of different options when you start to think about deploying Panther on the customer side.
good call out. All right, I think that's the rest of our questions here. So thank you all for the engagement. Love to get the questions from the audience and kind of go a little bit deeper. There are a couple asks for like, how do I get a more personalized walkthrough? So if you want to continue the discussion, there's a link in the chat to request an individualized personal demo. So from there, we would go in depth with all of your specific threat scenarios. After that, we would set up a proof of concept or POC where we kind of like really let you kick the tires on Panther and deploy it in your environment and test it against some key threat scenarios. So those are the next steps. And if you want to keep the discussion going, we're also going to be out in the market at events for the industry throughout this fall and through the end of the year. So we've got a couple of regional events coming up. So AWS Summit Toronto in about 3 weeks, and then GurCon, which is in Grand Rapids at the end of September. So just about a month away from that. And then bigger conferences in November and December. So we're going to have a presence at KubeCon. And then we are going to be at reInvent, the massive AWS cloud conference that happens. So keep us on the radar for that. We'd love to meet with you there, and you can see us in person and check out the platform in action. And with that, we're going to wrap up today. So thank you all again for taking the time to join us. Really look forward to continuing working with you all, and hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.